I'm so thrilled to be here today. I'm sure you hear that all the time every time a speaker comes in, but truly this has been a plan for months, maybe half a year, and I felt so honored to be in your organization to come to speak because of the depth and breadth of the kind of work you do and the excitement that I have about being able to share that spirit today when I talk about conversational intelligence. I will share one thing that we've used the word collaboration a lot in the preparation for this program. And I want to share that I learned when I wrote a dictionary for Random House in 1984 that when I found the word collaboration and I found what the definition was, I knew that there was something more than collaboration that I wanted to have something to do with. How many of you know what the definition of collaboration is? We use it all the time, right? It's funny how we just start to use words and sometimes don't. I'm going to teach you new language, so we don't double-click often on the words that we use. We assume that others have the same meaning. So when I looked up collaboration, it was cohorting with the enemy. I mean, seriously, the dictionary wasn't having the words that we needed to have in order to do the kind of work that you are doing and the work that I want to do. So today is going to unfold for you a new word called co-creation and conversational intelligence. And I want to also mark, as we go through today, I want to mark certain things that I think are going to be the most important takeaways for you. So words contain worlds. Words contain worlds. That means that inside of the use of a word is meaning that flowers inside of each person that's using it. And so we each bring a whole world of meaning and understanding to a conversation that we don't always see. And that's the bridge that has really been the force behind why conversational intelligence is so important and how it can help people who live all over the world. What I'm finding is I get emails from people and letters saying, thank you so much. I tried something with my son or my daughter that I found in your book. And it makes my heart beat so much extra because I know that this work is universal now that I've had a chance to test it. So this is going to be interactive. I hope that you're excited about doing some work with me. This is not just me talking at you. It's talking with you. So are you all ready to go? Yes. Cool. Okay. Let's do it. Conversational intelligence, how great leaders build trust and get extraordinary results. I came to realize that there was a great link between trust and conversations and relationships. And I found a woman named Angelica DeMoca, double PhD, who introduced to me the idea and the notion, which I hadn't heard anyone else talk about, which is that trust lives in one part of the brain, that's this part, the prefrontal cortex and the heart connection. Distrust lives in another part of the brain. It's back here, the amygdala, where we often get hijacked. And many of us think of, because the words are similar, trust and distrust, they're part of a continuum. But in our brain, that continuum is not one place, it's multiple places. And as I learned what this meant, it changed the way I thought about conversations and around interactions. Conversational intelligence is game-changing. You will find insights today that I believe are going to impact your relationship with people at home, your partnerships. Many of you are having partnerships now with people all over the world. My hope is for you that you'll find at least one thing, and I call them experiments, one experiment that you can do starting tomorrow, if not today, that you can bring back and experiment with. And I spell the word experiment different than most people. Now that I've written a dictionary, I have tremendous license to do anything I want. And I spell it experimentor. With mentor of the experiment is the word that I talk about. And I now have all over the world people experimenting with trying some new things that they learned from conversational intelligence and sending me letters about the breakthrough experience they're having. One quick story is that a woman from Australia heard me talk about conversational intelligence and called me on the telephone and said, I don't know if this is going to help or not, but I have a daughter who is 15 and we're having difficulty communicating with her. We've had doctors see her. We've had different people review what's going on. Nobody can find out if there's a medical problem. And I said, what is it? And she said, it's very difficult for her to find the words for what she's saying. And sometimes she doesn't. And I said, well, I'd be glad to give you a couple of experiments to try if you'd like to. And she said, anything that you can help me with, I'd love you to do. And so I gave her two things which we're going to talk about. One is called listening to connect, not reject. And the second is asking questions for which you have no answers. And as we go through today, you're going to see that so often the questions we ask are questions that confirm what we already know or defend what we know. Like, you'd really like to do it my way, wouldn't you? And so she did. And she called me back the next day and she said, this is absolutely amazing. And I said, what's amazing? She said, I had the best conversation I've ever had with my daughter. And I thought, oh my goodness, if this work applies to everybody, including young children, maybe there's something here that could be a growing movement in the world. She actually came to visit me in New York City with her husband, both of whom were lawyers. She graduated from Harvard, and I told her on the phone, I said, you're tough, you're strong, you have a lot to say, you're right. And you know what? That may have something to do with the interaction dynamics that you have with your daughter. They brought their daughter. I got to meet her in person. And so some of the things I'm going to talk to you about are simple. You're going to say, how could it make that much difference if all I do is listen to connect? And what you're going to find out is that it activates a different part of your brain, it activates a different part of your heart, and it activates the way you take in the spirit of another person, the way you take in their energy. The way you receive them is more important, almost, than what you have to say to them. And we'll take a look at this. How many of you already have a gut feeling that you have been thinking about these kinds of things in some form or another in your life that didn't quite know all the reasons why or if it could be real? Yeah. So what we're going to do is look at some things that people said you really can't talk about when you're talking to business people, and that is energy between people. That there's a field of energy, and within 10 feet, I'm picking up your energetic field, you're picking up mine. It's changing my heartbeat. And if I feel threatened by you, my heartbeat is going to flutter. And if I'm not looking at you because I feel threatened by you, by the way. And if I feel comfortable with you and my heart starts to go into a coherent wave, it's a signal in my brain that I can open up all my secrets, all the things that I have to share with you, all my vulnerabilities. And I think some of you have learned about vulnerability as one of the other programs. Share my vulnerabilities. Share that I don't know. Share that I want to connect with you and understand or have a better relationship. So this is conversational intelligence. Let me see if my little guy here is duplicating itself. Okay. What I'd like to do is have you watch a 2-minute video of the whole picture of what it's all about. And then as you watch it, I want you to think if there's anything in what you just saw that really sparked for you an interest in knowing more, so that as I shape the rest of our time together, I make sure I cover as many things as I can. Okay.
There are many types of intelligence, from book smarts to street smarts, from intellectual intelligence to emotional intelligence, and each gives us our own unique abilities for personal success. Yet one type of intelligence is universal and different from all the rest. It's something everyone possesses, yet until now has remained hidden from plain sight. This intelligence has the game-changing power to strengthen relationships, transform teams, and shape the future of our organizations for mutual success. This universal intelligence is called conversational intelligence. Let me explain. Each of us speaks an average of about 16,000 words each day. Trillions of conversations are taking place around the globe every single second. But just how many of these conversations actually make a difference? 9 out of 10 conversations miss the mark. Not all conversations are easy, so we avoid them. We talk past each other, we bang heads, or we get addicted to being right and stop listening to what others are really saying. Now, advances in neuroscience are giving us the tools to look inside of our brains while we're having conversations to reveal just what is going on and why. What we are learning is that conversations are not just about words or information. Encoded in every conversation is a hidden language of trust. And when we speak with each other, significant neurochemical exchanges take place that impact how trusting or distrusting we will be. When we are stuck in distrustful, unproductive, and even destructive exchanges, we activate our fear networks, causing us to withdraw or fight or flee. Yet not all difficult conversations need to cause us to feel threatened, close down, and protect ourselves from harm. Imagine you could activate your wisdom to discover how to elevate the quality of your conversation in the moment, learn how to gauge your impact and shift your influence positively, develop ways to get in front of the curve and prime conversations for trust and mutual success. Conversational intelligence, how great leaders build trust and get extraordinary results, provides the tools, practices, and rituals to activate your hardwired ability for more effective, co-creative, and transformational life-changing conversations. Conversational intelligence. Change your conversations. Change your life.
While you were watching this, did anybody come up with anything that you want to make sure that I put on the table for you today? Anybody? Please. The neurochemical changes? Great. I'm going to call that the neurochemistry of we, because it's that part of the equation that really helps us understand what's going on. Yes, please.
I think I would love to hear about some case studies for organizations like ours, where you've really seen specific changes that you can talk about.
Mm-hmm. And what is the unique part about yours that I should be thinking about when I sort? Yes.
Maybe repeat the question. So my question was, if there are case studies that you can share with us from organizations like ours, and then you ask what type of organizations those are. I don't know that it's unique per se, but we're an organization where we have people with deep technical expertise. We're dependent on working with partners in sometimes very complex networks of collaboration, and where we have a tremendous sense of urgency about the work that we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Great. I started out my career working with accounting firms, which are very technical, and then pharmaceutical companies, which are very technical and scientific. And I think that might be a profile that we could work with. Yep. Anybody else? Great.
I was interested in when you were saying what you were saying about difficult conversations, and particularly when it comes to different levels of conversation, where you have structural differences between people on either side of the table. So, the foundation's in large part a funder, but we rely on partners to deliver a lot of the work. So, how do you sort of take some of those structural challenges around conversation sort of off the table and make it more productive?
What makes it structural challenges?
Well, there's an element of he who pays the piper calls the tune. And if you're trying to avoid that, and I think that's a lot of the time what we're trying to do, is have an honest discussion about how best to do the work, rather than asking questions like you did of, we're the funder and we've got this great idea, don't you think it's a good idea?
Yeah, right, exactly, transactional.
Yeah.
I'm going to call that moving from difficult conversations to level 3, so that we have a way to mark what that looks like. Great, thank you.
If you could address the particular challenges of communication when by telephone and not in person. We do a lot of teleworking, video conferences with people around the world, so we're not always able to be face-to-face and get the energy directly.
Right, exactly. I'm going to give you, that question always comes up in every program that I've done, so I'm going to give you all a tip, and if you haven't tried it, it might be helpful. Human beings need to connect more than anything else. And we need to feel like we're part of a community. And whenever we feel that we're being rejected or our voice is not being heard or understood, it causes that lower brain to really start to activate. And one of the things that I did in a research project with a teleconferencing company was to take the wisdom from the Indian society, where people make circles, Indian circles, before they have an important conversation. And so we started to plot out where people were sitting in the conversation to the teleconference, to get people to announce themselves, to make a circle, and to close the circle. And just having your voice heard is an incredible thing to begin to bring people together at a different level. Because it's hard to have, the hardest part is how do I get my voice heard if I'm on nobody can see that I'm raising my hand unless I push a button, right? So that's one of the things. Yes?
And along the same lines, establishing that language of trust, but across cultures.
What I hope I'm going to do today for you is show that it does, whatever we talk about in terms of trust, applies cross-culturally. That we're going to talk about the lower brain, the prefrontal cortex. And so it doesn't matter where you are. As long as you honor these 5 principles, you'll be able to get there. Okay, I think we have, unless there's somebody that has a really important hand raised. Yes?
Hope it's important.
It will be.
Many of us work in teams, and interested in guidance you have either as the leader of a team or a participant when you see lack of trust or bad dynamics happening between others, how to play a role to make it better.
Yeah. Remind me to give you all an exercise that you can do. So regardless of where you live in the world or what type of team you have, this is going to be a helpful exercise. Okay, so let's move on. So conversational intelligence, what is it all about? This is a great quote from the Pentagon spokesman, Robert McCloskey, which is, "I know that you believe you understand what you think I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant." So how many of you have been in that situation before? Raise your hand. Now, why didn't some of you raise your hand? I want to find those people because this is human nature. And I'm so excited that some of the things that we're going to talk about today will help make a dent inside of that for you in your thinking. So what is a conversation really? What really happens? I want you to see yourself on these bullets and see which of these are those that you gravitate towards or you have found problematic. We assume that others see what we see, hear what we hear, and think what we think. Just because we're using words that we are familiar with, we think that the other person is getting exactly the same thing that we are. We don't realize that trust changes how we see reality. We now know that when our lower brain is activated and we're in distrust, it causes us to think differently about the reality that before we didn't have distrust with. It literally changes the way we process an interaction with someone. We start to question in our mind, did they tell us the truth? Can I really trust them to deliver this? All the questions that we talk about in our head when we feel distrust. And then we're often dropping out of the conversation because we're now in our head thinking about the conversation. When we're upset, we can't stand in someone's reality with someone else. How many of you have learned already in the work that you do that if you step into somebody's point of view, into the reality, and connect with them through their point of view, that something's going to change in the relationship? How many of you already know that? I'm sure you practice it, so I'm speaking to people that know this. But this is part of the trust equation that we have to deal with. We assume that we remember what others say, but really, we remember what we think about what others said. Right? So after the conversation, then you'll talk to somebody else about it, and now you're going to get another view, and then you're going to think about it more, and by the time you go back, it's hardly a remembrance of what the person actually said to you. And then we assume that meaning is in the speaker. Meaning is actually in the listener, what they take from you. So this is what human beings deal with every day in the conversations that we have. This is what it looks like. I had this wonderful group of animators help me at least try to tell the story of realities. I believe that each person has a reality that we map inside our brains through the way we experience the world. And then we come into conversation with others assuming that we're in the same reality. And so this is what it looks like. There are always reality gaps. It doesn't happen because you're a millennial and you're someone that's older. It happens in families. It happens in human beings. Some people end up with a smaller view of a universe because that's the view of the world that they deal with. So someone who's looking at a tree and apples are their most important thing and how they fall is so significant, that's their universe. Where someone else thinks about, oh my goodness, how could I turn that into cider that could go around the world? So while we think we're looking and thinking at the same thing, we're not. We actually have these different realities, and it's from that perspective that we start to make sense of the world and make sense of our conversations. Does this make sense? Is there any question about this? Pretty straightforward. So reality gaps occur all the time. They create uncertainty. Uncertainty is what destabilizes our brain most often, more than anything else. So while we might have someone who we feel a little trust and distrust towards, that causes uncertainty. And so many times, underneath the surface, we're not quite sure which direction to go with someone. And that's the need for conversational intelligence, to reach out and connect in new ways to close that reality gap. Conversational intelligence is about getting to the next level of greatness. Whether you're a human being, whether you're a company, whether you're a partnership, what's most important is getting to that next level. However, it depends on the quality of the culture that you create, whether it's a culture in a team or a company. It depends on the quality of the relationships, and then it depends on the quality of the conversations. 50 years ago, I started to think about what this meant as I looked at my family as a culture and tried to understand their dynamics. And when I started in companies 30 years ago, I was working on culture change, thinking that, like everybody, if we change the culture, we can change the outcomes. It took me 30 years to finally realize that if I focus on people and conversations, that's what changes the culture. It all rolls up into a culture change. And I have had one company change one thing and watch the change over 60 days or 30 days, and the whole company culture changes from one action. It could be listening to connect. It could be asking questions for which you don't have answers. But one major shift in the dynamic interaction can change a whole company's culture. So this is what I was told when I did my early work with Emily and with Susan. These are some of the things that you think about. It's that I to we shift that you talked about earlier, David. It's about moving from a transactional to a relational approach. It's about the grantee partner engagement process and how can we make that even better. It's about sensitivity to the power dynamics, the things that cause us to push away from people and those that cause us to pull towards each other. It's about collaboration, approachability, two-way feedback. It's about building strong relationships with grantees, partners, and employees. And most of all, it's about managing expectations and what I called also releasing aspirations. Again, you know that I did a dictionary, so every word for me has a sensitive meaning. And I'd like to present to you two different words that we often mix up when we're talking. One is expectations, and the other is aspirations. A lot of times we say, I expect you to do this, and in our partnerships, we expect people to bring and deliver things to the table. And then connected with expectations is either punishment or reward. I don't know if all of you have ever really sat back and thought about that, but right, if somebody doesn't bring it, then we're angry. And then we have some type, if it's an employee, we have some type of punishment connected to it. What I'd like you to think about is bringing the word aspirations into your conversations with your grantees and the grantor relationship. Talk about the aspirations, not just the expectations, because aspirations become bigger and create a bigger framework and a bigger energetic flow between people than expectations alone. Aspirations mean to breathe. And when we breathe hope and excitement and our greatest ideals into a conversation, and it is picked up by the other person, received in an incredible way, it opens the space in our brain to think about things in a new way. If we're only thinking about expectations, it actually closes our brain to watch for the expectations that we already know exist in the world. Does that make sense? Okay. If you come out of this session and just say, I'm going to experiment with aspirations and do nothing else, I'd love to be in contact with people to see what you see as the difference. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the aspirations for you as leaders. We're going to talk about what inspired conversational intelligence so you can see the background of how this came about. We're going to do neuroscience, as you've asked for. We'll talk about the 3 levels of conversation, why you need to know that there are 3. Nobody's talked about 3 before, and it does make a difference in how you engage. What lowers and raises our conversational intelligence, and how to prime for trust and other rituals. So, if you go back in time to when I was a little girl, you know about my dad. My dad was an ambassador to the United States. He brought dentistry around the world. I learned something about my father when I was 12. I didn't know it before then. And what I learned is that my father was, in fact, a stutterer. And when he would speak with people, he couldn't talk very well. And in fact, he really didn't talk much because of that. He was a twin, and my grandmother actually said that she wanted girls, not boys. And he took that to heart. Taking it to heart has something to do with how we think about ourselves and our identity. And he ended up becoming an emotional orphan in his own home. He was throughout his life until he got into high school. And then he had an amazing teacher that believed in him and saw the light inside of him and had him stand on a stage and take a role as an actor, something he had never done before because speaking and acting didn't seem to have a connection in his life. And when he got on the stage and went into that role, he was able to speak without stuttering. And when I heard that story, I wanted to know, what is that conversation that took place between those people? What was the relationship that made all that difference in the world? Because the story you know about my dad is he went around the world bringing dentistry. He taught himself 7 languages. He was a speaker and got 180 awards. It was so important, that conversation, and I started to study it. In fact, I took it into my graduate work at Drexel University. And we got some money from GE. This is like you give grantees and grantors. We got money from GE. And we built a talking typewriter. It was the first of its kind. The person at GE was the husband of the woman who taught me, actually, during STEG. She had a double PhD, and together they came up with an idea of, let's create an environment where children can learn and learn in a different way and see if there's an impact on those children that will go on for the rest of their life. And so we actually did a 10-year longitudinal study. Instead of teaching children about stories like Dick and Jane and all the books that were out there, we decided to start with pulling the stories from them, their view of the world, their reality, and see if we could start at the age of 2 and 3 and 4 of helping them validate how they saw the world. So we had them draw pictures, and then we recorded their stories, and we programmed this typewriter to help them learn on their stories, their view of the world. We also made sure I was trained for 6 months to be non-judgmental in the way I listened. So that is a practice that comes with practice. And so when I interacted with the children, it didn't matter what their story was, I gave them feedback that I was a receptive vesicle for them to be able to share it with me. The end of the story is that each one of the children went on to school We have recorded stories from their teachers saying that they were at least 2 years ahead of the other kids. What went on inside of these children that changed their life so much? They also had a 15% increase in their IQ, 15-point increase in their IQ. Never thought of before, never heard of before. So something about the quality of the environment, the way you prime an environment for conversations, which we'll talk about, and then the interaction dynamics that take place has an influence on people's brains in a way that can change their lives. I went on to take this work into, by the way, we studied them for 10 years, so we know exactly how impactful it was for these children. 10-year study. When I went into work with companies, and you asked for examples of case studies inside of companies, here's one. Boehringer Ingelheim was a sales organization. We're selling to pharmaceutical companies, to doctors, and we're selling in other places. But the managers were not being received very well. It turned out that out of 39 pharmaceutical companies, they were rated lowest out of all of them. And so doctors didn't want to see them because they didn't like the interaction. And so I went in to study the interaction dynamics of what went on between two people. And it turned out that they were very pushy. They were very salesy. They talked about their products and their features and their benefits. And because they were the lowest on the rung, they felt more pressure to be able to tell a better story about their products and about their features and about their benefits. And as it turned out, that was exactly the pattern that had to be interrupted. And so we reconstructed their whole engagement with the physicians. And within 8 months, they went from 39 to 1 in favor and have been high up on the list ever since. We started to do that work inside of the whole organization because they wanted to understand what are the interaction dynamics that make a difference. We're going to talk about interaction dynamics here. Again, it's a word that we don't use a lot, but it's not just about the I. Many people go to programs on learning how to be a better presenter. Many people learn how to be a better influencer or a better persuader. But what I wanted to look at is the interaction dynamics between people to see if that makes a difference. So, conversational intelligence is the hardwired and learnable ability to connect, to navigate, and grow with others. I broke it into 3 parts because connecting is the first part. And there's a theme in this work, which is relationship before task makes all the difference in the world. So again, I'm giving you these little conversational intelligence tips that for some reason turn around the energy in a relationship, even though they seem small. Relationship before task. So connecting, navigating, how do you work with others? What is that feeling as two people are in a conversation? That navigational feeling of where are we going together? Are we going together? Are we going separately? Is it I-centric or we-centric? Is it power over or power with others? And then growing with others, a necessity for building healthier and more resilient organizations in the face of change. CIQ begins with trust and ends with the high-quality relationships and business success. This is some research that we've been doing in this area with thousands of people. And if you see the green and the red, green stands for oxytocin, which is what's produced when people have a good feeling, when they're bonding with each other and it feels good. Cortisol is produced when the feeling in the interaction is not very good. And when cortisol is produced in the lower brain, it starts to activate that part of the brain that makes us feel fearful. Green opens up the prefrontal cortex heart connection. What's fascinating about this research is that there's a push and the pull at this moment where there are 2 things happening at the same time. One is people who said that they are interested in learning how to have difficult conversations. That was one of the things that you asked for. However, if they do that at the same time, they're still focusing on convincing others that they're right. What happens to that conversation? What happens to that moment? So what I'd like you to do is think about the conversations that you have. And I'd like you to share with the person sitting next to you. So if you're not close to somebody, please do. You can work in 3s as well. What is something that happens in conversations that make you feel like you're closing down and you can't connect with that person? Identify something that you might have in common with your partner or not in common. And what is it that makes a conversation great? What are the characteristics for you? So we have 2 distinctions. So turn to the people next to you. Pick a couple people to sit with. So first of all, as we were talking, did anybody hear a shift in the sound in the room? Yeah. What was going on? What happened? Did you hear the lift that all of a sudden at one point you got a big lift, right? So when oxytocin is being produced between people, That's what happens. It causes us to collaborate in a much easier way. There's now research that's being done with children that are autistic that when they are given oxytocin through a spray in their nose, and I've worked with autistic children, they actually can step into collaboration with people and know the skills. It's not that they don't know them, but that extra oxytocin is what they needed to get over whatever the barrier was, whatever the pattern was. So what did you say about what closes you down? What is the feel-bad part of conversations for you? Anybody? Do you want to? Is there anybody that would like to speak up and give us a clue? Because I know you're not alone. Whatever you're thinking, half of the people in the room are thinking. What makes it close down? Yeah.
We talked about how either one-on-one or in a group, there's often a wall of caution where people nod, smile, but you can see in their head they're going, "What is she saying?" You know. But they agree, and then they go back to the desk, and the conversation wasn't heard.
Right.
So because people are just too nice to speak up or disagree.
Yep. Yeah. So interestingly enough, when our lower brain is activated, the distrust part of our brain, we also go into appease behavior: fight, flight, freeze, and appease. So we kind of, oh yeah, it'll go away, and I'll figure it out later, or whatever it is, right? And you never do, right? So thank you. That's extremely common. How many of you have ever broken, let's get into the difficult conversation part of this talk. How many of you have ever broken that moment and asked a question that actually created engagement? How many of you have ever been experimentors of the conversation and tried something that you'd like to share? There's some people back there. How do you take that difficult moment and turn it into a great moment?
I think using plain speak and just having the courage to ask the obvious has worked for me.
Mm-hmm. To ask the obvious, did you say? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the obvious might be?
Just what's going on. I see you're checked out. I'm not understanding you. Could you try it saying it in a different way? Could you help me?
Right.
Like I statement.
Exactly. And you're bringing that person across. There's a space, and now the space starts to disappear. Yeah. It's being transparent. When we think about what helps build trust, it's being transparent about the moment, putting words to the moment, because you're feeling it and they're feeling it, but somebody needs that courage to spray oxytocin in their nose and take the step forward. And even questions like, what would it take to make this conversation better for you? Those are the questions for which you don't have answers. They seem so obvious, but they really work. Anybody else? Please.
So we talked about how some of the words that we use a lot around here, for many people, signal the red. The word impatience, impatient optimist. The word accountability, which tends to make people fearful of, oh no, am I going to get dinged? And the focus on results at the expense of relationships. And using those words early on can right up front set people into the red zone.
Wow. And they become part of a culture without realizing it, because we all think, oh, it's so great, accountability, let's have everybody be accountable, yes. And then I'm running back and saying, oh my God, what did I forget to do? I'm going to be in trouble, right? But I'm going to ask you, if you're comfortable thinking about the things that you can identify that might be worth a lot of conversation after I leave. Because you're doing what I normally do when I go into a company. You said, what do? I do what are called conversational makeovers. I ask people to take a look, once they understand the framework, at what are the things that are triggering our behavior to send us back into our amygdala. And then when people get into teams and they talk about the words the teams are using, the team has the ability to reauthor the language of the team in order to change the words. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it does make you accountable for making the makeover in your organization. Anybody else? Please.
Conversations where people are interrupting each other can be really difficult, because maybe some people need a little more time.
Excuse me, what did you say?
Exactly, to fully share their thought can be really frustrating.
Yeah, exactly. We're all thinking about our thoughts when we're thinking in conversations. I did a research project with 350 people at one of the accounting firms, and we had people, you might want to try this, I had people take a piece of paper, do a chart, And as the hour came forward, they had it marked off in chunks, and then every time they moved from listening to not listening, where they would drop out, they had to draw an arrow down to show that they were dropping out of the conversation. And it turns out that every 12 to 18 seconds, we do some form of that as we're listening. Why? We hear a word that is something that we should have been thinking about and we didn't. We decide to go out and think about our meeting that's next. We think about how horrible that person is, whatever it is that we think about. Every 12 to 18 seconds, our mind is doing that. So it makes a person wanting to jump in quickly right there, because that's really what they're doing, is thinking about what they want to say. Well, let's go over to the other side. How about the good feel-good conversations? What do they contain? What's the ingredients? What makes them a different form of cocktail in our brain?
It's both opens up and closes down. It's if you're in a conversation about a project perhaps, and someone introduces a brand new idea or something innovative, some people love that and get excited and want to brainstorm new ideas. Others really close down and say, I'm linear, we're on a track, we have to keep going, and it can cause real conflicts in the conversations.
Right. And have you found any phrase to use at that moment to reframe, refocus, or redirect when you see that happening? Because now you know the pattern, right? And it could go either way. Reframing, refocusing, and redirect is a very helpful conversational agility skill. What have you found works in that moment?
Well, I don't know if I have all the answers, but I think it definitely is acknowledging the new ideas and really working through them, because I think they can come out better on the other side. But also for the people that need more framework in it is to talk through, okay, is this work in our time frame? Is there funding for this? How does this fit with what we're currently doing? So, but honoring that new idea and letting it run its course.
Yeah, honoring and letting it have a life. What the research is showing about new ideas, especially if they're radical ideas, is that if you compare people that are bringing new ideas into a room versus taking the current ideas and creating plans for them or prioritizing them to get results, right? Where do you think the best ideas come from? New, radical, different, wild, creative things. And so we're finding it that more we honor them, like you're talking about, and give them a life. In that, if you have people take Post-its and write down some of the things they're thinking about, which sometimes our brain is very open in the prefrontal cortex, and you will have ideas. How many of you have had an idea that like flies in like a bird and then flies out, right? You knew, and you were so smart at that moment when you caught it in your head, and then it went out the other side, right? That's when that part of your brain you need to know has opened up, has delivered an idea that you have never thought about before. It's often surprises to us, and that's why we have to write them down. I carry pads now everywhere for these ideas. But when we feel comfortable and we're relaxed, this part of our brain opens up and shoots new things together. It tries to combine things. That's what it's designed for. It's all about creating new wisdom and new thinking and new foresight. And if that part of the brain is open, wow, we become like the little kids. Our IQs go up 15%. How do we create those environments? These are some of the ways. What else is a feel-good?
Another reword is respect. And I think when there's respect in a conversation for all those that are present, it helps to open things up.
What does respect look like? How does that show up? I love that word, and how does it show up? What can people do to show respect?
I think be accepting and understanding, trying to engage, and when new ideas, for example, when new ideas come in, rather than shut them down. I don't know. I'm not really sure. I'd like to hear what other people say, but I know often when our most difficult and uncomfortable conversations are when you don't feel that you're respected or what you bring to the table is respected.
Exactly. And what I'm doing is double clicking. So again, this is a skill set that is just amazing, because we can all say, oh yeah, I know what respect means, because I can kind of feel when I've been respected. When you said that word, I feel, okay, I can say what I think. But what are the behaviors that we need to be doing in order to show that? How do we show up differently? It's the key. Great. Anything else on what makes it a good conversation? So what we're going to do is just go a little bit further. How many of you would like to know some of the science behind, a little bit more of the science behind this? Okay, cool. Okay, so here we have two people that are in conversation with each other. You see that these are the electrical waves that connect them. It turns out that our brain processes 50% higher through electrical connections than it does through chemical. things start as chemical exchanges in our body, chemical cocktails, and when they become electrical, it's a stronger power. And when two people are next to each other, they can feel that power. If it feels bad, their heart goes into fragmented waves, or if they feel good, it goes into coherent waves. So that's happening to everybody around the world. It doesn't matter what country you live in. We know that through conversational rituals, like some of the things we've been talking about, where you can even interrupt a bad moment, a difficult moment, and reframe, refocus, and redirect, you can bring back that energetic flow to a positive flow, even if you've had the most horrible conversation with that person right before. It also is at the moment of contact. Many of us think in big ideas when we're talking to other people. But as you learn to practice observation, and this takes time if you've not done it before, to start to notice things. How many of you have ever seen that gorilla play on the basketball court? For those of you, yes? So you've seen, there's this big gorilla that's taller than all the people, that people in white shirts and black shirts are playing basketball, and this gorilla marches off right down in the middle of all these people. And then they ask you, did you see anything? But you're told to watch the people, count the people that are wearing white shirts, and see how many there are. And we all do it, right? How many people see the gorilla? How many of you have ever seen the gorilla the first time you've seen that? No one that I know of in the history of the world has ever seen this big gorilla that's bigger than everybody. How does that happen? Because it's what we focus on is what we see. We need energy to focus on things, and that's what we see, and the rest of the world becomes blind to us. It's quite fascinating. So think about how that relates to your conversations when you're focused on something. So what I decided to look at, and what I would love you to practice, are the interaction dynamics. How many times do people in an interaction really listen? So when I started this in the 60s, not the 60s, I wasn't doing this. I wish, in my head. In companies, I was doing it with Union Carbide. And I just had them, and I'd love you to do this exercise. Watch in meetings, and on a piece of paper put ask questions, listen, tell. And just put those three things on a piece of paper and put a chart, ticks, next to what you see happening in conversations. And you will begin to notice something that was not visible before. You'll begin to notice how many people talk and who talks. And when they talk, how much room they give other people. I see you're shaking your head back there. You've done this before, haven't you? Yeah. And if you're an introvert, or if you're told that you're an introvert, it could be harder to enter a conversation when you see somebody who's very dynamic and strong, who's taking up the space. They own that conversational space. They're marking their territory, right? So notice, and then if you just want to practice a couple of things, see if you can change the energy yourself and ask a question for which these people had not thought before. Like, what's really going on inside of something, your head? Or when you say that, what were you really thinking? That's something that takes them to stop and think. These are the kind of questions. It's not questions about objective reality as much as it is, how do we get inside each other's heads? Make sense? Yeah, okay. So sending and receiving is critical. If you send a message and it doesn't hit because the other person's mind is someplace else, it doesn't count. And so take your little numbers and then see if you could be a coach, a peer coach for a team, if you want people to do it, and have you become the coach and give them feedback. It's amazing what things you can change in an organization. Vital instincts, I also discovered that was a word that wasn't in the dictionary. We know about territorial instincts located in the lower part of the brain. When we were living out in 6 million years ago and surviving on our own, this part of the brain was all about survival. This part of the brain has evolved. Evolution has taken us as human beings to this part of the brain, the executive brain, the prefrontal cortex. And I'll show you in a second what this brain has in it. So here's the science of conversations. So on the left, I'm going to talk about level 1 and level 2. On the right, I'm going to talk about level 3. So at the big star in the upper left-hand part of the brain, that's the neocortex. When we go to school, we're trained to develop a stronger neocortex. That's information. That's knowledge. That's what you go to school for. Many schools, except now, they're being changed radically with much better education, thanks to all of you putting money into the world of education. And we're seeing the difference that it makes. But that's what we were training kids for, is how to know something and be tested on it. If this activates, if we feel we've been embarrassed in front of a group, we answer a question in front of a teacher, and it's wrong, that lower part of our brain is going to activate. This is where distrust lives. In the other picture, this is where trust lives. This is where vital instincts lives. This is where the prefrontal cortex and heart connection are so important. It's this part of the brain and the heart. And so distrust lives here. Cortisol is produced on the left. Oxytocin is produced on the right. And the difference is huge. Our limbic brain in both cases are active because that's our emotional brain. And if we can pull our emotional brain into a relationship and feel positive and feel good about how we've been pulled into a conversation, it changes the dynamic chemistry that we have during the conversation. It's quite profound. So when we're activating the prefrontal cortex, we get more wisdom, immersing in the conversation. We get to see things and think things we've never thought before. We can innovate more clearly. We can develop strategy, which is putting together things that didn't make sense before, all of a sudden starting to make sense. And more deeply, we have a sense of empathy with another person. How many of you heard about mirror neurons? Has anybody? So mirror neurons were discovered in 1999 when a research group was studying, in Italy, was studying monkeys. And they gave two monkeys a cup to hold. One had a cup to hold and he had electrodes on his head. And they gave another one the opportunity to watch the other monkey and see what happened. And he had electrodes on his head. And they noticed that whatever action one monkey did, the other monkey started to mirror by watching each other. And that became the identification of mirror neurons, which are located in the prefrontal cortex. When people deeply connect, when they feel positive energy, that energy enables them to activate that part of the brain. So conversations activate different capacities in our brain. And when we mirror neuron someone, we can step into their world. It happens automatically. We're feeling their energy. We're picking it up. Listen, Harvard did this research project that just came out last week in Science Magazine and Mind. And I couldn't believe it, but they're now talking a lot about it, so it's got to be really true. They put two people 5,000 miles away with electrodes on their head. They weren't monkeys. They were people now. And they had the people think. One person thought of a solution to a problem. All they did is think about it. Their thoughts were then sent through waves in the internet to this other person 5,000 miles away. Nobody talked to the second person. The second person's brain picked up the pattern that were in the waves that were sent to that person, and they knew exactly what the other person was saying. Wow. That's right. That was like woo-woo at one time, right? That's wow. That shows that there's so much going on between human beings that are at a level below words that we are picking up and trying to make sense of. And so everything that we can do to create a safe environment where people can speak up, like you were talking about, when the conversation is difficult and you say, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't feel like we've covered everything. Or you interrupt a pattern where we could go into our old behaviors and not really find out what the other person was thinking. What a difference that would make in our lives. Does this seem simple? I mean, I'm trying to make it, is this right? Any questions so far about this? Can any of you envision yourselves finding a person that you'd like to do this with in your life? I see a couple heads shaking. Could be spouses. Yes. No.
I have a question for you.
Don't make it hard.
So, if people are in an environment where they're very stressed or they're very overwhelmed, is it harder to kind of go into the green? Mm-hmm. Or is there a propensity to kind of be in the red more?
Yes. If people do not use conversational rituals and practice them, but they stay inside and they get upset about what's going on in the environment, then we amplify whatever the feels and concerns are if we don't talk to people about them. We now know that we have 3 types of DNA. One is template, which is how we get our shape in our body. And we always thought that we just had template genes that were given to make you who you are. We now know we have transcription genes, which are genes that are encoded to be impacted by the environment, and what they are potentially are conversations. So my language, and we have a FOXP2 gene, which is language genes. Those 2 genes that we've discovered enable human beings to co-regulate each other's behavior. That means if you have an environment where people agree to have conversational rituals that will lower the stress in the team, you're co-regulating each other's bodies. You're co-regulating each other's minds. And so I know many companies that do rituals. One company put up a basketball thing in their office and had people play some basketball before a meeting to release the energy. Now that seems like a little odd, but there are all sorts of things that we can do with each other. I would love you to come up with an idea of what you can do to move your team through some type of ritual. Transparency is wonderful, by the way. People sitting down and sharing, this is what I'm really concerned about, and putting it up on the chart. We also know research shows that once we put words to the fears that we hold and we share them with another person, that literally takes the fear out of our body. It reduces the amount of fear. So this is a way that language can actually help you set the stage. Make sense? Any other questions about this so far? You're all going to be tested after this, by the way. No. So level 3 are the conversations that live on the right side of this picture, and level 1 and level 2 live on the left side. We do know that, and I've worked with lots of teams. Recently, I had a chance to work with a company that had 350,000 people and introduced level 3 conversations to the senior team. That was a company whose name I can't share with you, but they were going through a lot of difficult challenges that required decisions at the top that were going to be major, influencing the next 5 years of their growth. And by teaching and introducing some of these skills, the conversational intelligence skills, the level of trust and openness and transparency and vulnerability that the team had with each other enabled them to go through what I've never seen a company go through before, because they were present with each other and realized that the relationship was not going to suffer. It was really going to be, the relationship was going to get better as a result of this. So we know that transactional, positional are on the left pattern and transformational is on the right pattern. It turns out that young children, start out with a lot of openness in the prefrontal cortex, and it was never thought that that was the case. I remember research saying that not until you're 19 or so do you start to get really good sense, but they were talking about the kids that go out and drink too much. You know, I mean, that's, they said they don't have their prefrontal cortex attached. But in schools now, I'm seeing experiments being done with kids to activate this part of the brain, asking a lot more questions for which they don't have answers, doing things that, in fact, we never thought young kids could do. So fight and flight on the bottom, and here we go. So what this brings us to is that when human beings feel a sense of openness and trust, where a relationship is more important than the task, where they're willing to go into deep dives with each other to really step into each other's shoes and feel the other person, not just ask questions and then move on to what they want, but really deep dive into a person to understand them. When we're able to create a sense of shared success, which is often not present when we have bodies, like you talked about before, who are at opposite ends that are not operating with the same end results. And the last thing is that we're willing to tell the truth when we find reality gaps. And that's what we were talking about before, about that simple question of, I see the world a different way than you do right now. Is there anything we can do to talk about it? Those simple skills, conversational skills, anybody can use, will bring us closer to connecting with another person. You can see green in the middle because that's where we actually see a bigger universe. We now know that when we're in fear, we only see the world in front of us. We're worried about protection. But when we are open to another human being and trust them, we actually hold an energetic space into which it's almost like a white space that we can create together and co-create together, which is why I thought the word co-creation was really a symbol of something new, a different type of conversation. So resistor at the left, skeptic, wait and see, experimenter, and co-creator in the far right. When I'm right and I want to win, and my head is thinking about that, even if I don't say it to you, I'm projecting a different kind of energy than when I'm projecting the energy that I really care and I'm really interested. And that's when I start to get biases because I believe so much that I'm right and others are wrong. That's where we activate the distrust networks and lose the effect of the trust networks. These are things that you've seen all of us do. We go into compromise. We go into compete. We go into, and I say collaborate is one step less or lower than co-creation. We go into avoidance behavior, and we go into accommodate. I want to check time to see how much time we have for interaction exercises. We have till 20 minutes, okay. So what I'd like you to do is I'm going to show you what are the two things. One are threats, and I'd like you to identify which of the threats are most active for you because they will bring you into the red when it comes to your mindset. And then I'm going to ask you to identify which of the forces that are most important to you so that each of you begin to identify what are the triggers that activate you to either go into red or go into green. So conversations shape reality. They either open us up or close us down. Take a look and share with the person next to you because putting words to something like this helps you internalize it in a way that you can do something about it. So which one of these, when you hear the tone from someone, it activates you. You feel hurt or rejected. You're afraid to take risk because of what they've said, like you're going to be in trouble. Exclusion, anger, taking away of your territory, or lowering your status. Just take a second and see if any one of those is something that is activating you to close down. It's like a threat that may show up in a relationship or in a conversation. Take a second and share it with one of your partners. And I'm going to ask you to do one thing before you do that. If you don't know the person, or even if you do, I'd like you to try an experiment that also creates oxytocin. When you turn to the partner, because you're going to be sharing something vulnerable, put out your hand and make contact with their hand. Okay, take a second to look in their eyes. Now you've just done a double shot of oxytocin. Oxytocin makes us feel more comfortable to be vulnerable with another person. Okay. Now, one next question. With the same people that you were talking with, what happens, in fact, instead of closing down, when your brain opens up? And when your brain opens up, there's certain forces that are at play that help bring people to feel good with each other and feel like they're willing to open up their brains. Interestingly enough, the highest rated is fairness, where you feel that there's something fair in the conversation. If someone owns the conversational space and you don't, that's not fair. So it could be everything from as simple as that to a fairness about what you're willing to share. Even with monkeys, they've done experiments with monkeys that don't share their bananas when they're together, and they're thrown out if they're packed. Now, we can't do that quite the same way, but it's, it's a potential for humans as well. So fairness, ownership, a sense of owning something, reciprocity, that give and take, cooperation or collaboration, being able to have a voice. That is probably the most important thing that I could mention today. That if you create space for some people to have voices that didn't before, and if you do that, even people that have different points of view than you, it's going to change the dynamic and change what people can co-create together. Expression and status. So one more time, check with your partners which is the one that for you is the most important, that you know that is that trigger that you evaluate, and you will pull out if you're not getting that in the conversations that you're in. So find your trigger. This is the positive trigger. This is what you need. These are the needs. Anything on this list, and if not on this list, share with your colleagues what you think is the most important. Take a second. We'll do this. Yeah.
We're going to come back together. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now, if we had enough time and we were here for a day, I'd ask each of you to announce your observations about yourself over the next 5 hours, but I'm not going to do that. We only have 15 minutes left. But there's something about claiming your thinking, both about what closes you down and opens you up to people. Again, these are activators because they bring you into a place of trust with yourself and trust with others. So important. I have one more thing I want to talk about, and then I'm going to leave it open for more questions, and that is I want you to see the difference between the levels. You have some wonderful little booklet put together with things that you can take back and learn more about. So don't open it now, but I just want you to know anything that I didn't cover in depth, you'll probably find something here to think about, or the book, which has tremendous examples of rituals that you can be using with each other. What I want to pull together is that this is the conversational dashboard. As you come out of this meeting, begin to observe what closes people down and opens them up, what puts people into resistance. We know that you've even identified what the answers are. When you honor someone else, even if their point of view is different, it all of a sudden changes the energy from resistance, because we all want to fight for the ideas that we believe are real. Underneath it all, we each have our own reality, and on some level we now know that we're fighting for our reality to be true. And so we're not going to give up addicted to being right. In fact, when I wrote that article for HBR, that was the most popular article of the month, if not the year. And it helps explain why we do that. It's human to fight for being right. That's what we were designed for. That's what we teach people to do. What now is even more human is to have that ability to have empathy for other people whose ideas are different than ours. And so what we want to look at next, what does it mean to use level 1, level 2, and level 3 conversations? Level 3 is transformational. It's where we partner with the people that we work with in a different way. We're doing it through the prefrontal cortex heart connection. There's a lot more acceptance of the other people's ideas, even though they're different from ours. We're aware when we get activated, and we try to control those activations, especially when you talked about examples of whole teams coming together and saying, let's set the space for it to be safe so we can all work together. That's called co-regulation. It's quite powerful. We don't want cortisol. We want more oxytocin to be distributed throughout your organization and in the partnerships that you build with each other. So here are the level 3. Each level is something different. One helps us connect, the other helps us navigate, and the other helps us grow with others. Transactional conversations are much more of the telling and asking. That's level 1. We're really not hearing, and let me do the whole piece. We're confirming what we know. Level 2 is defending what we know, advocating and inquiring, but a lot of our inquiry is to find out if we can move somebody to our point of view. How many of you have actually been taught that that's a great negotiation skill, right? Get people to move in the direction of your point of view. People are more sensitive to that these days. We're getting to the next level of our understanding of conversations. But level 3 is discovering what we don't know. And so the interaction dynamic in level 3 is sharing and discovering. Almost no judgment, curiosity about the other person and what you don't know yet. We know that when we're listening in level 1, we're doing face value listening because we think the words are just the words and we think the facts are the facts and we're trying to get facts to confirm what we know. However, if you live your life in level 1, the kind of work you want to be doing more of is not going to happen at the level that you like to be doing it. If you move to level 2 and you do a lot of advocating and inquiring, you need to do that to know where people stand, because human beings, when they know where other people stand, are actually more respectful of their point of view. If we each know where the other stands. But if we're hooked in that level, and we're addicted to being right, or in the tell, sell, yell mode, where we're trying to take over the conversation and bring you back to what I'm thinking, we've lost the other person's mind, heart, and spirit. If we live in level 3 with people, and we cover the first, the second, and the third, we go from face value listening, positional listening, to listening to connect. And when we do that, and I can't say that you can do it, everybody can do it tomorrow, the first time you do it, but my gut is that you will do it pretty quickly once you see the results. Because people, in fact, really do appreciate being appreciated. And when we feel that, our heart changes. And when that happens, our brain opens up. And then wisdom emerges in the relationship. So level 1, level 2, and level 3 are the most important things that you need to understand and practice. And when you find yourself stuck in one of the levels too much, reframe, refocus, and redirect yourself to get to a next level. And understand that it's going to make a huge difference. It isn't just the difference in the moment. This is going to impact and have a ripple effect on potentially the future of your teams, your partnerships, and now we know countries that are being able to be serviced by the things that you work on and the projects that you work on together. So I wanted to ask if people had some questions. We have a few minutes more where we can, yes, please. There's a mic up there.
Hi, Judith.
Hi.
Thank you for this work. I think that words are really important, and they do carry deep meaning. However, in really difficult conversations, how do you shift energetically? You could, now that we've sort of intellectualized this exercise, we can come up with the words and say, oh, I'm really curious, but how do you shift energetically and show up in a natural way and come out with the words that really feel sincere in your body, as well as the other person also feeling it, rather than just hearing the words at that.
Right. And so a lot of the work that I would love you to practice and understand doing, and if you have the book, you'll begin to see more of it, is called priming. It's really important. If we have a relationship that's difficult and we want to shift that relationship, is to prime our own mind, first of all, to be in a space where we're willing to connect and not reject and not judge. If it's an important meeting that you're going to have with people, another example of a client situation, how many of you know Coach, the pocketbook company? We've seen their bags around, right? I started working with them when they were a $250 million company, and they ended up being close to $4 billion. And what we talk to them is, in difficult conversations where it's going to be hard, prime the meeting before you even have the meeting. And so they weren't able to convince people that their designer thinking, which is what they wanted to bring into the world, was going to work, because they were always brown pocketbooks or handbags. And so they had conflictual conversations every time they met, and people were trying to influence, and it wasn't working. What we had them do is send an agenda beforehand and ask the people that they were meeting, whether it was Bloomingdale's or another company, to put their ideas for what the agenda would be. So you already get their ideas out on the table before the meeting even starts. I also deconstructed the conversation and found out that they were sitting at a big conference table with one person from Macy's here and Coach here, and that already activates the part of the brain that is the power over part of the brain, and both were doing that. So even the seating that you have can change the way your brain reacts to what's going on. So we had them send the agendas, get more information, be at a round table, and sit next to each other and listen to connect, not to try to influence and persuade them. And that whole process was the turning point that enabled Coach to grow their business the way they did. And every time people went out as salespeople, they started to understand that priming makes a difference. How I think makes a difference. If you start with me, then it'll change the we. Another question.
Do you find that gender inflects this work?
In what way?
That there are differences in the dynamics of teams or individual conversations that are caused by or interpreted by our genders.
Do we have 5 hours? I will share that there's a lot of research on gender studies, and I go into companies, and I'm sometimes asked to coach a male executive whose voice isn't heard enough and coach a female executive's voice that's heard too much. So we have tremendous stereotypes that live inside of companies that cause us to think a certain way about gender. That's why the idea of leaning in, for example, has become so important for women to learn how to lean in and become part of the conversation. And I've coached some women who wanted to be, quote, respectful of the audience before getting involved. And all I taught her to do is take 3 seconds faster to enter the conversation and watch what happens. And so, yes, there are differences. When we look at monkeys, men and women, they are actually different in the way they behave. So we have that as an inherited characteristic, that women are different than men. You know, we have more estrogen, they have more testosterone. So some of that it's chemical, it's going to affect us. But we're now at a time where gender doesn't need to be the difference that it was, and it doesn't need to be the stereotype that it is. Does that make sense? Great. I think you'll be...
So I'll just be cynical for a second and suggest that the graphic on level 3 could be interpreted as people sitting around a table spinning around in circles. And so I'm curious whether co-creation, in your experience, takes more time.
So each one of these levels has a downside. So too much tell and not enough ask puts us into the tell, sell, yell syndrome. We get caught in that. Too much advocate and not inquire puts us into the addicted to being right, and too much sharing and discovering puts us into all talk and no action. So you've identified the downside, yes, because people love it. We're very full of oxytocin. So that's why all 3 levels are important. If we don't go to that 3rd level, we're not going to open up a new universe of thinking. But we have to not let go of the ones that take us back to ground and get us into thinking more linearly. Yes, great question. Yeah.
Even the questions we ask in this room seem to hit one of these levels. So I'm going to try to bounce all over the place, I think, with mine. When people are at different levels in the same room,
yeah,
is it better to try to meet at the same level, even if it's the lower common denominator? Is it better to try to raise somebody? Or is it better to just support the conversation? What's
the practices and the guidance? Yeah. So once people know, this is what I did with the company with 350,000 people. We taught them the levels, and then we asked them if they would observe, have what I call the 3rd eye, where they can actually observe what's going on while it's happening in front of them. And if they think that people are either stuck or in too many levels and they're not all on the same page, so they can't have a good conversation. Some people are fighting for ideas, and other people are, well, here are all the facts, and they're not connecting. That once people know the levels, you can say, hold it, we have 3 different levels going on in the room. Okay, where do we need to be? What kind of level do we need to be in order to process where we are right now? Let's start there, and then we can always go back if we need to. And the whole room then engage. It's fascinating. I mean, I've never found anything that requires less energy to put into place in a difficult situation as some of these practices. Because once everybody knows it, they're engaged and they want to make it better. Yeah. Are we done?
Yeah. Yep. Well, I want to ask you to join me in thanking Judith for what was a tremendous and very thought-provoking presentation. So first of all, let's do that.